Well, good morning. Welcome back to GLBC Connections. I hope you had a nice Thanksgiving. Today, as we talk, we're going to look at the end of Mark 3. As we do that, I was reminded for birthdays in the office, we always have a little birthday meal. And invariably, I have to tell you, our secretary makes something that is always pretty fabulous. And it's different things at different birthdays. Sometimes she repeats. Anyway, she made something new the last time. She had sausage. She'd made sausage and she wrapped it up in a pastry. Now, I like sausage and I like pastries, but the one inside the other just really made it fabulous. I mean, it was really good. And I know I probably shouldn't be eating either one, but man, when you put those two things together, it is really a glorious, wonderful food. So I asked her about it. She told me how she did it, and it's too complicated for me. So when my birthday rolls around and she says, "What do you want for your birthday meal?" I'm pretty sure that's going to come up. Well, the reason I mention that is because today we're going to see for the first time something that Mark does actually quite often. It's called an intercalation. It is a story inside of a story, just like the sausage was inside of the pastry. What we're going to see today is two stories, one inside of the other. And every time Mark does that, he does it for purpose. He does it to teach. The stories, I want to say, they complement each other. They go together, and they help us interpret each story. Separately, the stories are fine, but together, they really teach something powerful and profound. So we're going to go to Mark 3. We're going to see the outside of the story first. Starting in verse 20. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." So his family thought he was nuts, and they go, and the real idea there, they're going to go seize him to take him away because they think he's crazy. That story finishes up at the end of Mark 3, starting in verse 31. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Well, who are my mother and brothers?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my mother, my brother and sister and mothers." The idea is this. Jesus says, I have a new family, one that puts their faith and trust in Jesus. And that's one of the important points of all of the Gospels, that we have a new community when we follow Jesus. But I said there's a story inside the story, and I want to see that as well and see how that really interprets the idea of the new family. Starting in verse 22, let's see the inside of the story. And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, "He is possessed by Beelzebub," by Satan basically. "By the prince of demons, he's driving out demons." So Jesus called them over to him and began to speak to them in parables. "How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Then he can plunder the strong man's house." Well, here Jesus is basically saying, if I'm of Satan, why would I be casting out Satan's demons? That makes no sense. He says that would be a divided kingdom. But he finishes with words that I think so often are misunderstood and hard to understand. He says this, "Truly I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and every slander they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They are guilty of an eternal sin." And he said this because they were saying he has an impure spirit. Those words, the idea that there is an unforgivable sin, is powerful, and they've been profoundly misunderstood through the years. But when we see the sandwich, we see what Jesus is really saying. Jesus is rejected. He's rejected by his family, and he's rejected by the religious leaders. But that rejection is not the end of the story. And in a part, this is a story for his disciples as well, an indication that they also will be rejected. And so Jesus says, you will be rejected by the religious leaders, and you may even be rejected by your family, but you have a new family, family of committed followers of Jesus Christ. What then is the unpardonable sin, the unforgivable sin? What does it mean to blaspheme the Holy Spirit? It means to reject Jesus. That's what Jesus is really saying. He says to the religious leaders, you have seen me. You have seen the light of my face, as one writer says. You've seen the light, and you've called it darkness. That's what it means to reject the Holy Spirit. To commit the unpardonable sin is to reject Jesus. Well, these two stories then tell a story of Jesus' rejection. I think so often we, particularly in a social media world, we have a hard time thinking about rejection. We spend our time trying to gain approval and get approval and have approval of different people. And here, this particular word is a reminder that approval is not what we're after, except for Jesus. He's really, in the end, all that matters. Following him is all that matters. Being with him is all that matters. And that will change who our community is. It doesn't mean our families don't matter. It simply means this, that when we look to Jesus wholeheartedly, when we look at him as the light and call him light, that other people who look at him and call that darkness, we really don't have the most central thing in our life we don't have in common with them. Because of that, we need a new community. I hope then you'll think about where you're trying to find approval and where you find community and who you look for that from. And I hope you remember and realize that if Jesus is first and foremost in our lives and hearts, if he's all that matters, then we will have much in common with other people for whom that's all that matters. And for that reason, we'll have a new community, and we belong to a new community. I want you to be part of that new community as well, part of that Jesus-following group of people. So that's today's message. And I hope you'll take it to heart. Think about who your community truly is and what it means to truly follow Christ.